Animations used in this video have been developed using evidence gathered during the investigation and are displayed for illustrative purposes only. They are not to be used for further analysis.
The ATSB's second and final report from its investigation into the propulsion failure and near stranding of a bulk carrier south of Sydney highlights invaluable lessons on proactively managing emergencies and the importance of responding agencies effectively coordinating. Following this extensive investigation, the ATSB has issued 8 recommendations to the responsible bodies involved. On the 3rd of July 2022, adverse weather made it unsafe for bulk carrier Portland Bay to remain at its exposed berth in Port Kembla, New South Wales. The decision was made for the ship to leave port and remain at sea until the weather improved sufficiently to allow a safe return. In the early hours of the following day, while drifting and slowly steaming about 12 nautical miles from the coastline, the ship's main engine developed mechanical problems, effectively disabling Portland Bay in the bad weather. After unsuccessful attempts to resolve the engine problems, the ship's master radioed New South Wales authorities for emergency tug assistance, following shortly afterwards with a pan emergency broadcast on Channel 16. By the time a tug was en route from Sydney to assist, the ship had close to 1 nautical mile from the rocky shoreline south of Sydney, where the master made emergency use of both anchors in a desperate attempt to prevent stranding. Harbour tug SL Diamantina, which had sailed with an unserviceable aft towing winch after the New South Wales Port Authority's request, arrived on the scene more than 1 hour after the ship anchored. Despite the best efforts of the tug crew, initial attempts to push up on Portland Bay were abandoned due to the risk of serious damage to the hull. This was followed by several unsuccessful attempts to connect tow lines. Portland Bay's mooring ropes, then mooring wires, which were attached to Diamantina's forward synthetic tow line, parted 3 times over the following 2.5 hours, leading the ship's master to abandon the task. Shortly after midday, 2 hours since assuming control of the incident, the Port Authority's incident controller requested of the AMSA's liaison officer that the state's nominated ocean-going emergency towage vessel, Svitzer Glenrock, be activated. However, the request was lost between the Port Authority and AMSA's incident control rooms and subsequently not actioned or followed up. About 2 hours later, after being provided with ocean towage equipment, 2 more harbour tugs arrived at the stricken ship and attempted to tow it clear of the coast, towards which it had been dragging anchors. In the following hours, one of the tug's tow lines parted in the rough conditions and Portland Bay drifted back in the direction of the shore, with the second tug still attached. Portland Bay's master again made an emergency deployment of both anchors about 1 mile off Bait Bay. Even with both anchors deployed, the ship struggled to hold its position and continued to drag slowly towards the coastline. Around 6:30 p.m, following a request from the Salva and then from the Port Authority, AMSA tasked Svitzer Glenrock to sail and assist, leaving its Newcastle berth 4 hours later. As the state-nominated ETV, Svitzer Glenrock arrived on the scene the following afternoon, almost 30 hours after the master had first requested emergency tug assistance. On the morning of the 6th of July, Svitzer Glenrock, along with harbour tugs, towed Portland Bay into Port Botany, where it was berthed for refuge and repairs. The ATSB's systemic investigation found that the unfolding events were initially triggered as the ship had remained close to the coast on sailing from Port Kembla, instead of safely clearing it to 50 miles as per the ship's manager's procedures. During the first night on the 3rd of July, while less than 12 miles from the coast, Portland Bay operated its main engine at low speed while rolling and pitching heavily in the bad weather, resulting in engine load fluctuations and turbocharger surging. Performance was further degraded by a leaky fuel injector, poor combustion and excessive cylinder lubrication. When one of the 2 main engine auxiliary blowers failed just before 5 a.m. on the 4th of July, air for fuel combustion significantly reduced and engine speed was limited to dead slow, effectively disabling the ship in bad weather when roughly 11 miles from the coast. Investigation Manager Vic Chowdhury said the investigation identified that when the master first reported the emergency to the ship's managers, they focused on engineering solutions, but not on notifying authorities so that an appropriate emergency response could be initiated.
This initial 2-hour delay in reporting was then compounded when the receiving New South Wales Port Authority took a further 45 minutes, which was 30 minutes after the PAN urgency broadcast, to notify AMSA.
As the scope of the impending emergency was becoming evident at around 8 o'clock, 20 minutes prior to the ship drifting into state waters, the Commonwealth Joint Rescue Coordination Centre tasked 3 rescue helicopters to evacuate crew before what was believed to be an imminent stranding of the ship, with the first responding harbour tug still 2 hours away. A 4th helicopter, unbeknown to the JRCC, was also dispatched at the same time by New South Wales Police. Despite several attempts, winching of the crew was abandoned due to the hazardous conditions.
While the rescue attempt was appropriate and consistent with overriding safety of life considerations, some matters, such as which crew would remain on board for towing operations, were not discussed between the parties and most likely overlooked.
The ATSB found that following the aborted rescue attempt, subsequent response actions by the ship's manager and salvage company and the relevant state and Commonwealth maritime response bodies were confused and inefficiently coordinated. Most notably, the coordination of emergency towage, salvage and directions to allow the ship refuge in port did not follow relevant established plans, leaving the ship exposed to stranding for 2.5 days. Despite it being available for either commercial hire or government tasking, more than 12 hours elapsed before AMSA tasked the emergency towage vessel Spitzer Glenrock, which was the only vessel in New South Wales capable of effectively assisting the disabled ship at sea. And between pre-sailing preparations and bad weather, it was at least 17 hours away. Although having been in deliberations for almost 14 hours, the process to issue a direction to tow the ship into port for shelter took the authority a further 7 hours in internal discussions and drafting.
Delays like these increase risk in time-critical situations. Our investigation also found that the salvage company, while certainly very limited in towage options, did not make those limitations clearly known to the ship's master and managers or to the responding authorities.
Optimal emergency management relies on taking a series of appropriate actions in a timely manner. When delays or confusion sets in, the likelihood of a successful outcome is significantly diminished. ATSB Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell says failure is very often associated with actions that are too little, too late.
The National Plan reiterates the principle of over-escalation in initial response. Now that's on the basis that it is much more efficient and more effective to scale down an incident rather than try and scale up an incident. Whilst the first responding tugs received a lot of praise for their actions in what were really challenging conditions, but ultimately the 3 tugs that were dispatched were harbour tugs, and they were ill-equipped and not capable of the task at hand, nor were they ever going to be based on what their known characteristics and capacities were. It was only the emergency deployment of both anchors on 2 separate occasions that prevented this ship from stranding, and had it stranded, it would have done so on a rocky coastline and in pounding seas, and with disastrous consequences. So this was an incident in which the 3 legislated bodies that had a defined role within both the national and the state plans believed it was someone else's responsibility. And they've justified their position based on 3 different interpretations of the same plans. Now those plans are designed with the one objective in mind, and that is to make sure that emergencies like this are effectively coordinated and effectively managed by all parties working together. This left the emergency management almost solely in the hands of commercial arrangements. Now, those commercial arrangements had significant limitations, of which the report goes into some detail. And most notably, those limitations revolved lack of suitable and available assets on the New South Wales coast.
You can read the final report on the ATSB's website by searching MO-2022-006 via the link below or the link in our bio.